Welcome back to another crochet tutorial with Cozy Rosie UK, and today I am sharing with you Simon the Snowman. This little cutie doffs his cap or his top hat at you to welcome you into this tutorial. I'm going to take you through step by step how to make this little beauty. Before we get started, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and of course the notification bell so you never miss out another one of my crochet patterns or tutorials again. Let's go through the materials that we're going to need to make this beautiful snowman. I'm going to be using this Paintbox Yarns Simply Aran, which is a size 4 yarn, and I'm going to be using the recommended hook size of 5mm. If you find that you do crochet a bit loosely, you're very welcome to go down a hook size and use a 4mm crochet hook, and this will give you a snowman that's about 6 inches tall. You can make your snowman a bit bigger by either using a heavier weight yarn or double stranding. So you could hold 2 strands of Aran together to make a chunky. This gentleman has been made using 2 strands of chunky or bulky weight yarn. He's incredibly firm and he's obviously a lot bigger than 6 inches. I'd say, including the top of his hat, he's incredibly tall at almost 10 inches tall. You've noticed a few more colours on Simon there, so I'm going to be using this Paintbox Yarns Simply Aran in, I think this is Soft Fudge, which is shade number 209, and that's going to be for his arms. I don't have any black Aran in my stash, so I'm going to be using 2 strands of this black acrylic yarn. And then for his nose, I'm going super bright with this fabulous orange. Again, this is in double knit, but that will help to keep his nose that little bit smaller. And I will be using a 4mm hook for his nose. I've made Simon's eyes using safety eyes, and these are a 10mm or a 9mm safety eye with their backs. And for the coal down his belly, I've got these little 7mm pom-poms, which I got from Hobbycraft. They come in a pack of 50. So if you want to put more or use this for his mouth, it's very easy to do so. I've obviously got a pair of scissors. I've got a darning needle. I'm going to start by making Simon's body, which is in colour A, which is this Paintbox Yarns in paper white. So gather all of your materials and let's get started. So beginning with colour A, and I'm using my 5mm crochet hook, we're going to start by making a magic circle. Now the way that I make my magic circles is I begin with the tail in my non-hook holding hand and I wrap it around my fingers, putting the working yarn over to the back and just securing that. So I have parallel lines on the front and a cross made with my tail at the back. I then pop my hook under the front loop to pick up the back loop. I bring it through and I'm turning to create a twist. As I do that, I'm then going to pick up the back strand and just bring it through the loop on my hook. I can then remove my fingers. I'm going to untwiddle this yarn, keeping the tail on the side. Find my working yarn, and I'm just going to make a chain 1 to secure. I will do that again because I know that this is quite a tricky thing. So I begin with the tail in my hand. I wrap the yarn around my fingers, putting the working yarn to the back and over to the side and secure it there. I have parallel lines on the front and across with the tail underneath at the back, inserting the hook under the front loop, pick up the back loop, twist and turn as I come around. You can see there's a bit of a twist in the yarn there. Pick up the remaining yarn, which is the working yarn, and just bring that through the loop on my hook. I kind of twist it before I take my fingers out, and then I can just untwiddle my working yarn. Oh no, my tail, should I say, to make sure it's not wrapped around that circle. Bring my working yarn into position and we're ready to go. You can make a chain 1 if you want to make it secure, but you don't have to. If you really can't get that magic circle, then we can very simply make a slip knot, place that onto our hook, making a chain of 4, before slip stitching into that first chain that we made and slip stitching to create the ring. So then we can work into the center of that ring rather than have to worry about making a magic circle. I am going to make a magic circle because it does make the beautiful closure we need for our toys. So I'm just going to quickly do that again. And obviously, as you can see, once you've mastered it, it becomes pretty quick. Once you've got your magic circle or your chain ring, we're going to start by working 8 single crochets into the middle of that ring. Now I use my spare fingers to secure the ring into place, and I'm holding my tail next to the ring I'm working into so that when I've worked all the way around, I can pull the tail and that will create the perfect close. So we're going to start by inserting our hook underneath the magic ring and the tail. We yarn over, bring a loop up, yarn over, pull through those 2 loops. I'm going to do that for a total of 8 times. So that's number 1, 2, insert again, bring it up, pull through 2 for number 3. I'm not worrying about whether my stitches are getting twiddly because we can straighten those out as we move around. If your magic circle is getting too big for you to handle, you can just tighten it a little bit and continue working into it. That's number 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Now obviously white is one of the hardest colours to work with, so it is quite hard to see your stitches. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and I've got 9. Let's start again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I have 9. So there we go. Let me take 1 off. I always like to check my stitch count before I close my magic circle. Now obviously I don't know if you just saw that, this was twisted. I make sure that my stitches are flat and all facing in the same direction before pulling on the tail to completely close my circle. Move that tail out of the way and put it to the back because that's how we're going to identify the right side and the wrong side. Now we're not going to be joining our rounds, we're going to create a continuous spiral because then we won't get a seam in our project. So very definitely grab a stitch marker ready to mark our first stitch of our next round, of round 2. At the end of round 1 you should have 8 single crochets. We're going to start in round 2 working straight into that first stitch of round 1. So make sure you grab both loops of that first stitch, and we're going straight into working 2 single crochets into that same stitch. So once you've inserted, we yarn over, bring a loop up, yarn over, pull through 2. And we're going to work a second stitch into where we've just worked. So you can see it's just coming out there. So I'm going to reinsert, bring my loop up and pull through 2. Before I go any further, I'm going to grab my stitch marker and mark my first stitch that I made in the round, because then I don't have to count. And it's very easy to lose our space when we're working in a continuous spiral. We're going to work 2 single crochets into each stitch around back to that marked stitch. We should end with 16 single crochets. So we have 2 in that first stitch. There's our next stitch. Pick up both loops and work 2 single crochets. And we're just going to repeat this all the way around, working 2 single crochets into each stitch. So continue around. I'll meet you at the end of round 2. So when you reach your last stitch, you should be working stitch number 15 and 16. To count your stitches, don't forget that first marked stitch is stitch number 1, and you can simply count around 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 and 16. So at the end of round 2 you should have a total stitch count of 16 single crochets in the round. We can remove our stitch marker for a moment, ready to work our first stitch of round 3. We're not joining because we're working in a continuous spiral. So we're inserting our hook into that first stitch that we made, just picking up those first 2 loops to work 1 single crochet into that first stitch, and then we're going to work 2 single crochets into the next. That's 1, and you reinsert for number 2. Don't forget to replace your stitch marker in that first stitch that you made. So you've just worked 1, 2, and that will be number 1. Just means that we don't have to count quite as closely. We're going to be working 1 single crochet into the next stitch, followed by 2 single crochets into the next, all the way around. So we work 1 single crochet into the next stitch before increasing and working 2 single crochets into the next. So work 1 single crochet, followed by 2 single crochets, that's 1 and 2, into the next. Going to continue to repeat that all the way around, and then in your stitch before your marked stitch you should be working your final increase by working 2 single crochets. So continue to repeat that around, and I'll meet you at the end of round 3. When you've reached that final stitch before your marked stitch, you should be working your final increase to achieve your total stitch count of 24 single crochets all the way around. Going into round 4, just going to remove my stitch marker, ready to work 1 single crochet into each of the next 2 stitches. So that was number 1, and then we're working another single crochet into the next. I'm then going to replace my stitch marker, so we've worked 1 single crochet and another single crochet, just placing my stitch marker back into that first stitch that we worked, and then we're going to work our increase. We've done 1, 1, and then we're going to be working 2 into the next. So that's 1 and 2. We're going to repeat this around, working 1 single crochet into each of the next 2 before working an increase into the next. So that's 1 single crochet, another 1 single crochet before working that increase into the next. That's 1, and reinsert for number 2. Going to repeat this all the way around, and once again you should end in the stitch before your marked stitch working your final increase. So once you've worked around back to that first marked stitch, we should be working a final increase into the last stitch before our first, and at the end of round 4 we should have a total stitch count of 32 single crochets. If you're not familiar with how to count your rounds when you're working in a spiral, starting from the middle, you can see your ridge for each round, and always count behind your stitch marker. So 1, 2, 3, and this is round 4. So for rounds 5 to 8, which is a total of 4 rounds, we're simply going to be working 1 single crochet into each stitch around and maintaining that stitch count of 32. So I'm just going to remove my stitch marker and work 1 into each of the next 2 just to start me off, and I can replace my stitch marker. So 1, 2. If you're really clever, you can calculate how many 32s you need to make, but I can't count that high when I'm just crocheting. And then we're just simply continuing around, working 1 single crochet into each of the next stitches. And we're just working 1 single crochet into each stitch around back to our marked stitch. We're doing this for a total of 4 rounds, so you can either make a tally or just count each round for a total, and we'll have a total of 8 rounds once that's completed. So remember to always count behind your stitch marker. So we're on 1, 2, 3, 4. This is still round 5 that we're working, and we're making we're getting ourselves to a total of 8 rounds where we're working 1 single crochet into each stitch around. Continue to work those next 4 rounds, and then I'll meet you for round 9. So once you've completed round 8, you should be looking a little bit like this. And for the right side of your project, I keep mine facing me. You can have it inside out, but the tail is the wrong side. So I just kind of tuck it in, and then I know that that's the right side of my project facing me. Going into round 9, we're going to start decreasing to create a bit of a neck for Simon. So I'm going to start by removing my stitch marker, ready to go into round 9. You should still have a stitch count of 32 single crochets, and we're going to start by working 1 single crochet into each of the next 2 stitches. So there's number 1 and number 2. We're then going to mark our first stitch of the round once again so we know where we are. And then we are going to work a decrease across the next 2 stitches. Now there are 2 ways that you can work your decrease when you're working in the round, and that is by either doing a standard single crochet 2 together, where you insert your hook into the first stitch, bring up a loop, you insert your hook into the next, bring up a loop, and then you yarn over and pull through all 3 loops. Now as you can see, that's already created quite large holes. So my preferred method is to actually use something called the invisible decrease. So I'm going to pull that stitch back and show you the invisible decrease as well. So the invisible decrease, you pick up just the front loop. So as you can see, I'm going in from under the front of the stitch and just picking up the front loop only of the first stitch to be decreased, and then before yarning over, I'm inserting my hook into the front loop of the next stitch as well. Then we can yarn over and bring up our loop through both of those front loops, yarn over and pull through both loops. And as you can see, those holes are nowhere near as visible. So if you want to, you can do a single crochet 2 together, or of course you can do the invisible decrease that I'm doing. We're then going to repeat this by working 1 single crochet into each of the next 2. So that's number 1 and number 2, before working that decrease once again. So for the invisible decrease, we're picking up the front loop of the first stitch, and then we pick up the front loop of the next stitch, we yarn over, bring that back through, yarn over and pull through both loops. We're going to repeat this all the way around, working 1 single crochet into each of the next 2 stitches before working our decrease, whichever way you prefer. This is a little bit fiddlier, but it looks so good that those decreases are practically invisible. So continue to repeat that all the way back around to your marked stitch, and at the end of round 9 you should have decreased down to 24 single crochets. I just want to point out, you see how far away my next stitch is? So just be careful that you're not working into the wrong stitch when you're doing your decreases. 1, 1, and then decrease. At the end of round 9, you should be left with 2 stitches ready to work your final decrease. I'm just going to do that quickly. And we should have reduced our stitch count down to 24 single crochets. You can already see that it's starting to come in at the base there. So at the end of round 9, you should have 24 single crochets. We're going to go straight into round 10. And so at the end, I'm going to remove my stitch marker, and for round 10, we are simply working 1 single crochet into each stitch around. There's my first 2, just going to pop my stitch marker back in and continue around back to the marker, working 1 single crochet into each stitch around. Working my final stitch of round 10, and then we're ready to go in to round 11. We should still have 24 single crochets at the end of round 10. I'm just going to remove my stitch marker, ready for our first stitch in round 11, and we are simply working 1 single crochet into that next stitch, and then we're going to work our decrease across the next 2. As a reminder, our invisible decrease is to pick up the front loop of the next 2 stitches before yarning over, bringing the loop up and pull through 2. Just going to pop my stitch marker back into that first stitch. And then we're going to repeat that the whole way round, working 1 single crochet into the next before working our invisible decrease or a single crochet 2 together across the next 2. So continue to repeat that all the way back around to your marked stitch, and I'll meet you for round 12. Just working my final decrease across the last 2 stitches. Oh, don't want that stitch marker to get in the way. And at the end of round 11, you should have a stitch count of 16 single crochets. You can really start to see it coming in there. We are simply going to remove our stitch marker from our first stitch, and we're working 1 single crochet into each stitch around. Don't forget to pop that stitch marker back in once you've worked your first couple of stitches. And then just continue to work 1 single crochet into each stitch around back to your marked stitch. Just working my final stitch, and we've gone down. Oh, this looks a lot tighter now, doesn't it, compared to how big and solid he was getting. So at the end of round 12, you should still have a stitch count of 16 single crochets. For round 13, we are working 1 final decrease round. We are working 1 single crochet into the first stitch before decreasing across the next 2 once again. Just going to pop my stitch marker back into my first stitch because it's very easy to lose track. And we're just going to repeat this, working 1 single crochet into the next before decreasing across the next 2 stitches. I'm going to continue to repeat that around until you have just 4 stitches remaining, and that's where I'm going to meet you. So when you have just 4 stitches remaining before your marked stitch, we're simply going to work 1 single crochet into each of the next 4. So that's 1, or the last 4 should I say, 1, 2, 3 and 4. So at the end of round 13, we're going to have just 12 single crochets remaining. Now this is looking a little bit flat, so I think it's time to grab our fibre fill or our toy stuffing, and we're going to stuff this body quite firmly. I always make sure that I fluff my stuffing out a little bit because I don't want any lumps. And then we're just going to shove it in through that small hole, she says. Make sure I push it right into the bottom and into those sides. Want to make sure we leave a little bit of space for us to keep working into these stitches because we're not fastening off. We're going to go straight into working the head, continuing with colour A. So once you've stuffed the body, leaving a little space to work into these stitches, we're going to go straight into round 1 of the head. We're going to start by working 1 single crochet into the next before working 2 single crochets into the next stitch. So that's 1 and 2. Just going to pop my marker back into that first stitch of the round. So that's, oh, I can't see. God. 1, 2, there's number 1 of the round. And we're going to repeat this all the way around, working 1 single crochet into the next before we work 2 single crochets and increase into the next stitch. So 1 single crochet into the next and 2 single crochets into the next. Just working my final increase to create that little flare out for the beginning of the head. So at the end of round 1 of our head, we're going to have a stitch count of 18 single crochets. Just going to remove my stitch marker, ready to begin round 2. We're going to be working 1 single crochet into each of the next 2 stitches. That's number 1 and that's number 2. So 1 into each of the next 2. I'm going to replace my stitch marker into that first stitch that we made. And we're going to repeat that all the way around. So 1 single crochet, 1 single crochet, and then we increase into the next. So that's 1 and 2. I'm going to repeat this all the way around, working 1 single crochet into each of the next 2 before increasing by working 2 single crochets into the next. We should be finishing off working a final increase into that very last stitch, and his head is most definitely flared out now, and we should have a total stitch count of 24 single crochets at the end of round 2. So for rounds 3 to 5, which is a total of 3 rounds, we're going to be working 1 single crochet into each stitch around and maintaining that stitch count of 24. So we are working 1 single crochet into each stitch around, back to our marker, provided we remember to place it in. And you should maintain your stitch count of 24 single crochets. So continue to work for rounds 3, 4 and 5, so just 3 rounds, and I'll meet you at the end of round 5, ready to start decreasing for the top of the snowman's head. So at the end of round 5, you should still have your same stitch count as of 24 single crochets. I'm removing my hook for a moment because now's the fun time that we can add Simon's eyes on. So I'd recommend placing the eyes between rows 4 and 5. So I'm just going to place the first one. So this is row 5 we've just worked. So I'm just going to place my eye there, and then leaving a space of 3 stitches between them. So 1, 2, 3, and that's where my next eye needs to go, is in that stitch there. And then when you're happy with the placement, you can secure them using your safety eyes. Now, I only use safety eyes. I don't give these to children under the age of 3, for anybody who is worried. Oh, ow. There is tools to do this apparently, but I've never mastered them. I just kind of put my fingers either side of the back. You want them to go in as far as they can go to get them as secure as possible. So there we are, we have eyes, or Simon has eyes, should I say. Place my loop back on my hook, ready to go into round 6, and we are going to start decreasing to close the top of Simon's head. We're going to start by working 1 single crochet into each of the next 2 stitches. So that's 1 and 2. We're then going to I'm going to have to place my stitch marker back in because I really do lose track so easily. We're then going to work either our invisible decrease or our single crochet 2 together across the next 2 stitches. And then we're going to repeat that all the way around. So we are working 1 single crochet into each of the next 2 stitches, followed by a decrease across the next 2. Oops. 1. So just continue to repeat that all the way around. You should end with a decrease worked across your last 2 stitches. So continue around and I'll meet you at the end of round 6. Just working my final decrease of round 6, and at the end of round 6 you should have a stitch count of 18 single crochets. Going straight into round 7, we are decreasing once again. We're going to begin by working 1 single crochet. Goodness, my hook's got squeaky. We're going to start by working 1 single crochet into that first stitch before decreasing across the next 2. Going to pop my stitch marker back in. And we're just going to repeat this all the way around, working 1 single crochet into the next before decreasing across the next 2 stitches. Just working my final decrease across those last 2 stitches. And we are nearly there. For round 8, we are going to be decreasing once again. And I've got my stuffing ready because we're going to be stuffing after this round. You are very welcome to put the first amount of stuffing in. I must admit I prefer to do it in stages because obviously we've got quite a depth to go to fill Simon's neck and his head. So I'm just going to stuff into the neck a little bit more, make sure that body is really secure, and do a little bit more. I want to make sure that these eyes don't go a bit squiffy as we're stuffing. I'm going to get those nice and firm into position. We need to make sure, I'm just going to put some stuffing in between those eyes so they don't get misaligned as we go. So I've filled up to about here on his head, ready to work our final decrease round. Just going to remove the stitch marker. For round 8, we are going to be repeating round 7. So we are working 1 single crochet into the next before decreasing across the next 2 stitches. It does get a bit fiddly when it's this tiny. Let me pop my marker back in, you know what I'm like. And we're just going to repeat that all the way around, working 1 single crochet into the next before decreasing across the next 2. Just working my final decrease here. And his head is pretty much closed. So we are going to fasten off. Well, I'm not going to fasten off just yet. I'm going to bring up my big loop and remove my stitch marker and finish stuffing the head firmly. And then we are going to need our darning needles so that we can fasten off with a long tail, weave through our stitches to close the head completely. Really make sure you wedge that in. Okay, once you're happy with all the stuffing that's in there, you can cut your yarn, make a knot. I'm just going to thread this tail onto my darning needle, and we're going to weave through each stitch around to close. You just need to secure your thread just around one of the loops with a knot, and then we can bury this end into Simon. We're just going to push it through till it comes out somewhere through a stitch. Ugh, I've stuffed too hard. Great. And then we're going to bury that thread through Simon. So you come in, well, come out of between a stitch and go back into the same space and come out somewhere else, because the stuffing will help bury these ends. Don't want to be pulling too tightly because you don't want to distort it, but just go back in the same space that you just came out of, come out somewhere else, and that will bury that end sufficiently. Doesn't really look like a snowman right now, does he? Oh, gosh. You see a little end poking out, just give it a squish, it will disappear. So now we need to transform Simon into Simon, really, I guess. We've got the snowman body, nice and diddy. So let's get making some accessories for him. We need to make a hat, some arms and a scarf. And of course, we need to dress him because, well, you're never fully dressed without a smile. Let's make Simon's hat. Now, as I've mentioned, I don't have any Aran weight yarn in black in my stash. So I've grabbed some double knit and I'm going to hold both ends. So I've taken the end out from the middle and I've unwoven some of the yarn from around the ball so that I'm working from the same ball of yarn. And we're going to start once again by making a magic circle or a magic knot. So I'm going to wrap the yarn around my fingers, putting the working yarn towards the back here to create my parallel lines with my cross at the back. Under the front, pick up that back loop, twist as you come up to create a little twist, and then we're grabbing that loop and we're grabbing that back yarn to bring it through the loops on our hook. Obviously I'm making sure that I've got both strands there as well. I'm going to untwiddle these and then we are ready to begin. If you aren't making a magic circle, you can of course make a chain of 4, slip stitch to that first chain that you made to create a ring. And we're going to be working into the center of our rings. We're going to start by making 8 single crochets into the center. So we're inserting underneath but into our loop, also working over my tails. We're inserting, bringing a loop up, we're yarning over and pull through both loops. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. And of course I've picked another colour that you really can't see on camera. This is fun. I'm going to find my ends, make sure that my stitches are all in line. I'm going to check them. Hang on one second. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, because I had 9, didn't I? I was doing his body. And pull my tails to close that circle. And once again, we're going to be working in a continuous spiral. So we're going to need our stitch markers. Going into round 2, I'm going to find my first stitch. Wow. I found my first stitch, just inserting ready to work, 2 single crochets. So that's 1. And there's that hole again. So I'm just going to put number 2 in there. And then I'm going to mark my first stitch, if I can see it. I think it's just viewing it on camera is almost impossible. There we go. We're then going to work 2 single crochets into each stitch around. So we're going to double our stitch count from 8 all the way up to 16. So 1 and 2. 1 and 2. Working that last stitch. Oh, look at this lovely knot we've already got. And at the end of round 2, you should have 16 single crochets. For round 3, we are simply working 1 single crochet into each stitch around. So that's 1 and 2. Let me mark that first stitch. And we're just working 1 single crochet into each stitch around. And that's number 16. So you should still have 16 single crochets at the end of round 3. For round 4, we're going to be working into the back loop only of our stitches, which is going to be near on impossible to show you on here. Let me grab a needle just to show. So there is our next stitch to work. If you aim for the middle of the stitch, you should pick up the back loop only of the stitch, and we're working 1 single crochet into each of the back loops around. So there's my stitch. You've got the front loop that's closest to you. You've got the front loop that's closest to you, the back loop that's furthest away. I need to make sure I'm getting both loops of mine, of course. And we just complete our single crochet as normal. So push through the middle of your stitch and it will pick up just the back loop. Just going to pop my stitch marker back into my first stitch. And we're going to repeat that all the way around, working 1 single crochet into each of the back loops around. Just working my final stitch there. I don't know if you can see yet, but what it's done is created a drop from the top of the hat down to start creating the sides. You should still have 16 single crochets at the end of round 4, and then for rounds 5 and 6 we're simply working 1 single crochet into each stitch around. So we're going through both loops of our stitch, so that's 1 and 2. And we're simply working that 1 single crochet into each stitch around for a total of 2 rounds, rounds 5 and 6. So continue to work those 2 rounds and I'll meet you at the end of round 6. So at the end of round 6 you should be looking a little bit like this, and it's time to flip our brim for our hat. So for round 7 we're actually going to be working into the front loops of our stitches to get the brim to come towards us. So we're just inserting from underneath our stitch just to pick up that front loop only, and working 1 single crochet into the next. We're then going to increase into the next stitch. So pick up the front loop, work your first, and then reinsert to work an additional single crochet. Just going to pop my stitch marker back in. We're going to repeat this the whole way around, working 1 single crochet into the front loop only of the next stitch before working 2 single crochets into the front loop only of the next. And it's going to make our brim come out towards us. So continue to repeat that all the way around, working only in the front loops of your stitch. You should end working 2 single crochets into the front loop only of that last stitch. So at the end of round 7 you should have 24 single crochets. Going into round 8 we're going to be working 1 single crochet into the next stitch, working through the whole stitch like both loops. We're then going to work 1 single crochet into the next. So we've worked 1 single crochet into each of the next 2, and then we're going to work 2 single crochets into the next to increase once again. So 1 single crochet into each of the next 2 before we increase into the next. That's 1 and 2. So continue to repeat that all the way around. Once again, you should end this round working an increase into your final stitch. So at the end of round 8, you should have a total of 32 single crochets. And the best way to finish off a spiral like this is to skip 1 stitch, slip stitch to the next, and that will help complete your circle very neatly. I'm just going to make a little chain 1, and then we are ready to fasten off. And we can get those tails woven in. Obviously, the tail goes on the inside so that you have the right side of your hat facing. It's just a little cutie little hat to go atop of Simon's head. Now, if like me you're finding that your hat is sinking a bit, feel free to stuff your hat so that you get the shape that you want when it's on its head, and it will help fill any gaps there as well. There we go. Now, once again, I've been stash diving. This is an orange that has been in my stash for quite a considerable time, and because it is only a double knit, I'm going to be using a 4mm hook for my nose. I would have preferred to be using an Aran weight yarn and a 5mm hook, but unfortunately I cannot because I don't have any. I'm going to start by making a slip knot and placing that onto my hook. We're going to start by yarning over and chaining 4 times. So that's 1, 2, 3 and 4. We're then going to work a single crochet into that second chain from hook. We're then going to work a single crochet into the next, and then we're going to slip stitch into this last chain. We're going to make a chain of 2, so that's 1 and 2, and slip stitch to where that slip knot is that we started with, nice and tightly, because we want a little peak there for the top of the carrot. And then for the fiddly bit, let me get the end out of the way, because we need to work through the stitch and the opposite beginning chain. So put our hook through the top loop of that stitch and through the corresponding beginning chain. And we're just going to slip stitch those together. That's once. That's another loop for a stitch. Through the beginning chain, doesn't have to be too accurate. And then for a final time, I should have a loop there. Get my nail to get that one on, I think. And through the beginning chain. This one we're going to work a single crochet, rotate to slip stitch back into the base there as well. We can then make a chain 1, fasten off, leaving a long tail for sewing, bring that through. Doesn't look like much of a carrot yet, I appreciate that, but it has a point, and that's the important thing. I'm going to thread the tail onto the beginning tail onto my darning needle, and we're just going to weave in and out of the back of this carrot to bring that tail down as well. Oops. Doesn't have to be overly accurate because it's such a small detail. And there we have a little carrot. And we're going to sew that onto his pretty little face. Probably do it that way around, so that's at the bottom. It's really hard to not make this look like a beak, but unfortunately carrots are orange, beaks are orange. So I'm going to place his carrot over there. We need some arms, so let's make some arms. I'm going back to my Aran weight here because I have that soft fudge, which is a great colour to make some arms. We're just going to make a slip knot and place that onto our hook, and we're just going to make a chain of 6. So a yarn over, pull through 6 times. 3, 4, 5 and 6, and we're simply going to slip stitch back down to where our tail is. So we're just inserting underneath the top loop of our chain and loosely slip stitching. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5, and then we have the beautiful little arms. Make a little chain 1 just to secure, and then I'm going to fasten off with a long tail because I want to use some of this yarn to create another little hand. And these cute arms are going to be sewn on or glued on just under where his scarf is going to be. So to create some extra sticks for his hands, I'm just going to insert my hook back through where we started our project. Going to place a loop of yarn over my hook, and we are going to secure that with our pull through. So we can just fasten off, and it creates a little knot, if I can find the end. Oh my, there's too many ends. And it's just creating a knot around that beginning space. So now we have 4 tails. We just need to trim his fingers, and they really don't need to be too long. Just want to make sure I get all of them. Do a bit of a hairdresser job, and I'm just going to come under here. Remember, we can always add, but we can't take away. No, we can always take away, but we can't add anymore. Just going to snip his fingers, and there we have his completed little hands. And then we can just attach those to the side of his body. So we need to make another one of these. So now that the arms are ready, all that's left to do is to create a little scarf. And I'm using some very expensive yarn, but I just love this red colour. I'm going to make a slip knot and place that onto my hook. The scarf is just very simply 1 row of single crochets. I'm going to start by making a chain of 30. That's a chain of 30, and you can check that it's long enough for your snowman just by placing it around the neck. You want it to come around and fold over, so I'm going to add an extra couple of chains. Doesn't matter exactly how many you make, just as long as it's long enough to go around his neck and do a nice little fold over. I'm going to do 2 more and then we can move on. So that's probably about 38 now. We're going to simply work 1 single crochet into the second chain from hook and into each chain across all the way back down to the beginning of our row, and then we can fasten off, and we're going to add some fringe. You don't have to add the fringe, it's completely optional. So once you've worked all the way back down to the beginning, we are simply going to make a chain 1, and then we can fasten off once again. Bring that through. Just going to check the length around his neck once again. It's a lovely red colour. Now if you want to add some fringing, you can use the same trick that we used on Terry's arms by simply inserting your hook. Simply inserting your hook into the end and just yarning over, pulling through and making a chain 1 to create your knot, and then you can snip, bringing it through to tighten that knot. It's just going to give us a little bit of fringing at the end of the scarf. I'm going to do the same on the other side, just working into the end of that last stitch. You just need to do it twice on this end of the scarf to give us a few extra bits. And there's no ends to weave in on the scarf as well, which makes life a little bit easier. So just like we did on the arms, we can just trim our fringe so that it's all the same length. Oops. Repeat that for the other end. So before we add our scarf, our hat, etc., we just need to finish off Terry's face. Now it's entirely up to you if you want to use the pom-poms to create a smile. I feel they're a little bit too big for his smile. I'm just going to grab a small length of about 10 inches of the black thread I used to create his hat. I'm going to thread that onto my darning needle, and we're going to add a little smile. So I'm going to come in from the back of his face, and I'm aiming to be 1 stitch below his eyes. I've got too much stuffing in his head, of course I have. God. So aiming to come out 1 stitch underneath his eyes. Make sure you leave a tail there. And then we're going to skip 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way over to here. And then we can come out in a similar place as that one. We don't want to pull this too tightly because we need to make sure that he does actually smile. So I'm going to hold it roughly where I want to position it. Make sure you're happy with the positioning, and then we're going to go back through for a final time. This time we're aiming for underneath his smile, because we're just simply going to come out of 1 stitch, and then we're going to pull the smile down to where we came out and go back through. You can aim for the same spot or come out somewhere different, it's entirely up to you. And gently pull it through, because you don't want this to be too tight or too loose. And then you can just make sure that it's even on both sides of his smile. And loosen that one up if you need to. There we go. And there we are. That makes him a smiley snowman too. And of course you're wondering, oh, if they're black, they're going to be seen. I promise you they won't. If you pull down gently, pull up on the threads and push down on the head, you can create a little bit of tension without distorting the smile and just snip those off, and then when you squeeze his head they will disappear. So the only thing left to do now is to attach the arms, the hat, the carrot and the scarf, and of course his beautiful buttons. I am going to be cheating. I'm going to be using my glue gun, my hot glue gun, just to secure everything in, and then he will be complete. I've just ran a corresponding strand of yarn around the top of his hat to match his scarf, and I think it's safe to say that Simon is complete. I hope you've enjoyed making your very own Simon the Snowman, and I've really enjoyed having you here for this tutorial. As always, I will see you in the next video.